Hi, this is Jay Smith. This has been a great series that we've been going through on the Quran. And we have now done 5 episodes just on this series. This is the 3rd series that we have gone through on the historical critique. And I want to do a quick wrap-up of the first 5 episodes to give an overview of why is it we're doing this and what is it we have found out so far. Now remember, in the very first episode, we looked at the claims that the Muslims made, and they all make the same claims, whether they are radical over here on the right, whether they are nominal. Maybe not the liberals, they may not make these claims, but certainly the radicals and the nominals always claim 4 things for the Quran. The first thing is they claim that the Quran is eternal, and that they get out of the Quran itself in chapter 85, verse 22, where it claims to be eternal. These eternal tablets that have always coexisted with God, one of the ironies, theologically speaking. Secondly, they claim that it was sent down piecemeal over a 22-year period from 610 to 632 to a man named Muhammad via the angel Jibril, or we know him as Gabriel. So those are the first 2 claims. Thirdly, though, that it was not compiled at the time Muhammad was living, it was then compiled right after his death, in the next 2 years following his death, between 632 and 634. That was Abu Bakr who compiled that one. He had a guy named Zayd ibn Thabit who was a secretary of Muhammad to do this very job. And then finally they say it was compiled in its final form in around 652 by Uthman. So, eternal, sent down, compiled completely at the time of Uthman, 652. And then number 4, motorcycle going by. We're in the middle of traffic here, so I have to be careful. And then number 4, that it has not changed since 652. Since 652, it's exactly the same Quran that has always existed for 1400 years, never changed. There in our hands today. And they would say that the Quran we use today is that Qur'an. That's the claims they make. Some scholars say that it hasn't changed one surah. Some scholars say not one verse has changed. Others say not even a word has changed. There are even some that say not even a diacritical mark has changed. That's how perfect it is, that's how complete it is, and that's how unchanged it is. Now that's a lot of different scholars saying a lot of different things. We don't have to listen to all of them. We don't have to take them all on board. But what we have to do is make sure that we answer these challenges. As the rain starts to fall, I'm getting it on my glasses here, as you can see. It just cools me down. It's very pleasant for me. I'm not sure the same for you. Let's unpack. And what we did in the next 4 episodes. Episode 2, we then looked at these 2 Qur'ans, complete and unchanged. We even just looked and asked these questions. Can you have 2 Qur'ans that come after Muhammad's life, both written by the same man, Zayd ibn Thabit, under the authority of 2 different caliphs, Abu Bakr and Uthman? We asked the question, Al-Fadi and I, why is it that there had to be a Quran written down after Muhammad's death to begin with? Why did not Muhammad have it written down during his lifetime? Was that not Muhammad's, was that not his remit? Wasn't he sent to earth as the receiver of the Quran? If that is the case, then why did he have it written down while he was still living? Now, the answer they would say is because he could not read or write. Understood. Why didn't he learn to read or write? He had 22 years to learn to read and write. He already knew the language. He could speak it fluently. Listen, it took me 2 weeks to learn how to read and write Arabic, and I don't even know the language. It's not that hard to do. So 22 years he never did. More than that, he had a secretary named Zayd ibn Thabit. Why didn't he write it down? Isn't that what secretaries are supposed to do? These are all the questions we brought up, and of course we asked them in the 2nd episode. Nonetheless, when it was finally written down in 632, why did not become the official Quran? Why is not the same Quran we have today? Why then 20 years later did it have to be rewritten a 2nd time? That's the next question. Why do you have to rewrite it a 2nd time? Because obviously, if this is the greatest of all revelations, if this is the one that supersedes everything that comes before it, then certainly the first one should be okay. Why then do you have to then write it a second time? And most importantly, why, according to Sahih Bukhari, volume 6, hadith number 509 and 510, did they then have to burn all the other copies? Obviously, they didn't agree. Obviously, there were real differences here. If you burn copies because you don't want people to read those other copies, they don't want them to read. That was in the second episode. We unpacked that. Now, that we moved into the third episode when we asked many of these damaging questions. And we need to ask these kind of questions. The reason why we're doing this is because Muslims will not ask these questions themselves. Listen, we've done this with the Bible. There has been hundreds of years now, since the 1800s, when they have looked at the Bible, unpacked the Bible, used source criticism, redacted criticism, literary criticism, historical criticism. Biblical criticism, by definition, is unique in the world. It was the one that created. It was on the Bible that all these criticisms were created. That has not been done to the Bhagavad Gita. It's not been done to the Upanishads or the Vedas. The Book of Mormon is getting it for the first time. And so finally, we're now getting it to the Qur'an, and that's why we're asking these questions. Now, we moved on to the fourth episode when we zeroed it onto one particular manuscript. The reason we did this is because though the Muslims claim that there are about 6 major manuscripts that exist today, we'll be getting into that later on, and we introduced them in the fourth episode. There is one that they claim is the best out of all the other 6. One, and that's the Topkapi, which is in the Topkapi Museum in Istanbul, there in Turkey. And that's why we have zeroed in on that one. They have redressed, and what they're doing is they're moving down and they're redressing their claims. It's fascinating to see, because when I started this work, I was told there are hundreds of thousands of manuscripts. Then it came down to a few hundred manuscripts. Then it came down to 6 manuscripts. And then finally, it has come down to just one manuscript, and that's the Topkapi. That's the only one they really want to defend anymore. They don't want to defend the Samarkand. They don't want to defend the Husayni. They don't want to defend the Ma'il. They don't want to defend the Patapalinus, and they do not want to defend the Sana. So they've only got this one to go with. That's the Topkapi, and that's why we're now zeroing in on this. And they're reducing every one of their platforms. Their platforms are being reduced, and there's such a reductionism going on that they only have one that they can now hold to, and so we're going to spend an awful lot more time on the Topkapi than the other, and that's what we're going to be doing later on. We're going to be actually unpacking some of the variants in that manuscript. But for now, we just looked at that one, and we asked the questions when it was written, and we quoted 2 scholars, Altıkılıç and Ekmel Nisanlı. Dr. Tahir Altıkılıç and Dr. Ekmel Nisanlı, both from Turkey, who both had access to the Topkapi. They were the ones that were responsible for the Topkapi. They've had the best work on it, and they were the ones that came out with their report. As it's really beginning to rain now, forgive me if my glasses really start dotting up with lots of drops. It's very refreshing for me. So here you have these one manuscript being studied by these 2 men that came out with their findings in 2009. It was printed up in 2013, so I could read it in English, which you can get as well. And I did my first debate on it in 2014 with Dr. Shabir Ali, and basically confronted, but I didn't confront the Topkapi so much. I already knew the problems with the Topkapi. Altıkılıç and Nisanlı both said that this was written in the second half of the 1st century up until the first half of the 2nd century, so about 670 up to 770. The end of the 7th century, the first half of the 8th century. 3 or 4 folios of surahs were written even later in the first half of the 2nd century. So basically, we're talking about the early 8th century up until the mid 8th century. I know some Muslims would like to go to 670 and start with that date, but that's not what they're saying. You don't start with the earliest date. You start with the median date, and you also talk about the other verses, surahs that were added at a later date after 720. But what was most damaging, not only is this not a 7th century manuscript, there are 2,270 variants in it. 2,270 variants, oh dear. Oh, and the Muslims have tried to say, oh, these are nothing special. These are nothing more than dagat alifs, the alif that is added at a later date. No, they're not, and we're going to show you that. I don't have time, and you're going to see. We're going to unpack and look at the variants, and wait till you see what kind of variants we have. These are not incidental variants. These are hugely significant, and you're going to see why Muslims don't have an answer for this, but that's for another episode. That's for yet later to come. Once we went to the Topkapi, and then we went to all the early manuscripts, the 6 of them. We unpacked, just looked at them, gave dates to them, showed you where they are. That's where we've ended now with the first 5 episodes. Basically to introduce the problems with the Quran. Starting with episode number 6, we get into the meat. This is where the real damage comes. So hold on, come on back, send these to friends, watch them yourself, and realize that this is something Islam has yet to really research, have yet to really tackle, has yet to come to explanations with, and has yet to come up with an answer. That's why we're asking it, and that's why I'm here, standing in, while sitting in front of you, asking these questions. I hope you've enjoyed this. Listen, if you want to support us, please do so. We'd love to have your support. You can go up to Patreon. Patreon, you can see it, and when you go up on the home, go up on the home view, and you will see Patreon up on the upper right hand corner. Go up there and support us. We need your support. We need to keep these videos coming out. We need to have you on board with us. It's terrific if you can do so. All right then, this is Jay talking about the Quran. Over and out.